I'm Richard from Cambridge Safety, and welcome to another of our Take 5 for Safety short presentations. Today we'll be focusing on occupational noise risk assessments and explaining why we need to conduct a noise risk assessment, what factors we may need to consider, and again, why we might need to review an existing risk assessment. So what are the risks presented by noise? Well, many people consider noise to be defined as unwanted sound and may think that noise only really applies or occurs to industries such as manufacturing or construction, where there's heavy plants, machinery, or anything really that generates a lot of noise. However, it's more than that. It's not just these industries where noise can be a problem. So again, you may want to think about perhaps people working in a call center all day, so being exposed to, again, a combination of people's voices, or perhaps the nursery worker that's surrounded by young children. So why conduct an occupational noise risk assessment then? Well, the purpose of the noise risk assessment is to enable the employer to make a valid decision about whether or not their employees are at risk from exposure to noise, and again, consider what action they need to take to prevent or adequately control that exposure. Remember, workers may not be exposed to the same levels of noise throughout the day, so they may only spend part of their time perhaps in a noisy area. So really, by observing where the employees are and what they're doing, and are they doing as you'd expect, being in a certain place for a certain amount of time, it's vital to have good knowledge of the time spent in noisy areas in order to make what we would call a reliable estimate of noise exposure. From there, again, we probably want to take information on probable noise levels. So again, likely noise levels, they need to be representative of the conditions and practices in your workplace. So again, it's true, whether noise is measured in the workplace or it comes from published information such as typical noise levels within the industry, or perhaps even the machine manufacturer, any of these sort of indications that could point us in the right direction. Again, during manufacturing, for example, you may need to use noise level information taking at various points where the employees could be standing throughout their shift, and then combine this with the observations based on that time. So that will give us a more accurate estimation of noise exposure. So if they're in a particularly noisy area for 15 minutes and then they move somewhere else for another hour and a half, again, you can see there how that would actually sort of spread out our exposure to the noise. And then finally, it could just be the outcome of a noise survey. So the noise regulations, because they require you to make measurements of noise if necessary, these measurements could be necessary if you can't find that reliable noise information from other sources. Then really you should ensure that a noise survey or measurements are carried out by someone who's competent. So what do the noise regulations say then? Well, we've got the Control of Noise at Work Regulations 2005. And in essence, the noise regulations are designed to protect against the risks of both health and safety from noise exposure. So the health risk of hearing damage in those exposed, and again, the safety risks involved with noise, such as employees' ability to hear instructions or warning sounds. So there you can see Regulation 5 of the Control of Noise at Work regs outlines the requirement to conduct a noise risk assessment if they're conducting any works liable to expose their employees to noise at or above the lower exposure action value, so known as the LEAV. So perhaps in a working environment, anything that's 80 decibels, remember again, it's A-weighted dBA, so what the human ear can hear, the filter if you like, for 8 hours. So you would expect that entire exposure over that 8-hour period. So in L108, so that's the approved code of practice for the control of noise at work, as part of Regulation 5 to do with risk assessments, they actually outline some simple tests to see if a noise risk assessment might be needed. So again, just to talk you through the table, they basically say that a test could be if the noise is intrusive but normal conversation is possible, then they could basically say that might be round about 80 decibels. So this is more of like a rough estimate for you, if you like. So again, if that's happening, you could look at if an employee is exposed to that for more than 6 hours, then it's likely you would need to do a full-on noise risk assessment. Again, if you have to shout to talk to someone who's only 2 meters away, you can assume that it's 85 decibels. Again, anything sort of 2 hours or more in that environment, noise risk assessment. And again, if you have to shout to talk to someone who's only a meter away, you can assume that the noise is about 90 decibels. So what do we need to consider on a risk assessment then? Well, just like every other risk assessment we conduct, if we've identified the hazard as noise, we need to identify those particularly at risk from exposure, estimate that likely exposure, and perhaps then identify some good control measures to try and eliminate or reduce the risks as far as possible. And then again, we would need to record it if we had 5 or more people. And again, it's no different when we're thinking about noise. So specifically in the case of noise, we need to probably consider the level and type of duration of exposure. So the greater the noise level, the louder it is, or the longer the duration of exposure, how long we're exposing our employees to, that would need to be taken into account. And again, it could be other characteristics such as the frequency. Is the noise continuous? Is it intermittent? Again, is there any sort of peak sound pressure, any loud noises? So power presses, for example. With this, employers also need to consider any extensions to noise and also include any exposure that could occur in rest facilities. So even if employees are away from the actual main source of noise, they may well want to consider where the rest facilities are located and see what levels of noise are happening there. They may need to look at the effects of exposure on noise to specific employees. So some workers may be given particular consideration. So those people that we know have pre-existing hearing conditions, those with perhaps family histories of deafness, again, pregnant workers and young people. Remember, linking back the Management of Health and Safety at Work Regulations 1999, that places certain prohibitions on employing anyone under 18 where there is a risk to health from noise. Again, we may need to, so far as reasonably practical, remember weighing up, the risk against the time, cost, effort, inconvenience, any sort of direct or indirect exposures to noise. So perhaps, considering the health and safety of employees resulting from interactions between noise, and there have been studies done on what they call ototoxic substances, such as mercury, and again, the links between noise and vibration. So employers must consider any indirect effects as well, resulting from the interaction between noise. And remember, we said earlier, audible warning signals, what have we got in place, such as fire alarms, where if we give them hearing protection, the employees may not hear it. So we may need to consider perhaps visual warnings or integrated hearing protection with communication facilities built in. We may need to look at any information provided by the manufacturers of the work equipment. Again, when I've bought a leaf blower, for example, it comes with all the information required and it tells you it could vibrate a bit, but again, it makes noise. So it sets out those level of decibels that the machine actually makes. You could also look at the availability of alternative equipment designed to reduce emissions. What have we got out there? Manufacturers are legally required to ensure the machine is designed and constructed to reduce the risks to the lowest possible sound levels. But again, as technology advances, if it comes with silencers, bafflers, all the other things we know about sound and ways to reduce it, what have we got that could reflect progression in perhaps low noise design? We may also need to consider appropriate information obtained following health surveillance. So again, the arrangements to receive any sort of anonymized health surveillance program feedback. So again, we're protecting that medical in confidence information about our workers, but at the same time, we're taking that information and saying, well, actually, have we got any new cases? Have any existing cases worsened? And again, this will help us decide whether or not the risks are being controlled effectively. And then finally, the availability of personal hearing protectors with adequate attenuation characteristics. So in essence, the employer must consider suitable hearing protection for the noise in the task. Again, that hearing protection needs to be suitable to reduce the level of noise, but again, that needs to be balanced because we don't want to cause that sense of isolation for our workers. And again, it needs to be comfortable and it needs to fit properly, especially if we've got other PPE or personal protective equipment we're wearing. So that good, nice layered approach. So finally then, why might we need to review an occupational noise risk assessment? Well, the actual regulations state that we should review it periodically, or again, if we believe it's no longer valid. So specific reasons could be if we suspect that it's no longer valid because there's been a significant change to the work we're doing. So for example, if we have changed the way that we work or a process, we've purchased a new piece of machinery, we've stopped using older machinery, or even if we've altered shift patterns, then again, a review must be conducted. Likewise, awareness through trade journals, industry news, or even HSE bulletins. So if we become aware for any reason that actually there's new ways of working or improved noise control techniques that could protect our workplace, then they should be applied. If any health surveillance results that show employees' hearing has been damaged, suggesting that noise risks are not being properly controlled. And again, finally, if we start looking at control measures that we couldn't originally justify based on probably the grounds of cost, if technology has become more available, it's become cheaper, so reasonably practicable, again, weighing up the risk against the time, cost, and effort, then perhaps we should be looking at technological advances. And as per Regulation 5 of the Control of Noise at Work regulations, if you discover that a risk assessment is required, then use the key points outlined in this presentation and remember to review it regularly, especially if you believe it is no longer valid or you know something has changed. Again, for further guidance, you can look on the HSE's website or look at L108, which is the approved code of practice for the Control of Noise at Work regulations, or perhaps if you have a bit less time, simply look at Industry Guidance Note 362, Noise at Work, a brief guide to controlling the risks. Thank you.